The Fleet Academy's officer lounge buzzed with a particular brand of restrained arrogance that only came from cramming 24 different species into formal dress uniforms and expecting them to make polite conversation. Commander Vex Callion adjusted his ceremonial bone spikes, a display of Zenthri military prowess that had taken him 3 decades and 17 campaigns to earn, and surveyed the room with the satisfaction of someone whose chest bore enough metal to stock a small armory. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the light as he turned, each facet reflecting the parade of accomplishments that decorated every uniform in sight. The Kytherian delegation sported neural enhancement badges arranged in complex mathematical patterns. The Dulceti wore their campaign ribbons in strict chronological order, each one representing a different front in their centuries-long expansion wars. Even the notoriously modest Velnari had managed to pin their service records onto their flowing robes in tasteful, understated arrays. Then his gaze landed on Cadet Martinez. She stood near the refreshment dispensers, engaged in what appeared to be an animated discussion about orbital mechanics with Professor Yent Culver, and her uniform was absolutely, positively, aggressively bare. Not a single ribbon, medal, commendation, or even a basic training completion badge. Just regulation gray fabric stretched across shoulders that looked like they could bench press a shuttle, topped by a face that suggested she found the entire gathering mildly entertaining. Fascinating, Vex Callion muttered, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Zenthri's speech sound like controlled avalanches. The human appears to have misplaced her entire military history. Lieutenant Commander Brixthalin, whose own Hagrin uniform displayed enough combat decorations to qualify as body armor, followed his gaze. Oh, that one. Martinez, right? Only human in the advanced tactical program. Heard she scored highest on the asymmetric warfare simulations. Then where Vex Callion gestured with one clawed appendage. Are her acknowledgments, her service records, her proof of competence? Brixthalin's mandibles clicked in what passed for a shrug among his species. Maybe humans don't believe in showing off. The suggestion was so absurd that Vex Callion's bone spikes actually rattled. Every civilized species understood the fundamental principle of military display. Your accomplishments were your credentials, your medals were your resume, and your ribbons were your proof that you'd earned the right to give orders to those with fewer ribbons. It was basic social hierarchy, refined across millennia of interstellar warfare. He approached Martinez with the deliberate stride of someone accustomed to being the most decorated person in any room. She looked up as he arrived, her expression shifting from academic interest to polite attention with a smooth efficiency of someone well-versed in diplomatic protocols. Commander, she said, offering a precisely regulation salute. Enjoying the reception? Cadet Martinez. He returned the salute, then gestured broadly at the assembled crowd. I couldn't help but notice that you seem to have forgotten something rather important this evening. Martinez followed his gaze, taking in the glittering display of military achievements surrounding them. Sir, your decorations, your service record, your proof that you belong in the same room as officers who have actually accomplished something with their careers. His tone wasn't unkind, merely puzzled. Are human cadets not permitted to display their achievements? A smile tugged at the corner of Martinez's mouth, the kind of expression that suggested she'd been expecting this conversation. Oh, we're permitted, sir. It's just that most of my missions weren't exactly public knowledge. Professor Yent Culver, who had been eavesdropping with the shameless curiosity of an academic, inserted himself into the conversation with typical Velnari directness. Classified operations? How intriguingly dramatic. Though I must admit, Cadet, that the official records of human military engagement are rather sparse. Sparse is generous, added Captain Morakves, materializing beside them with the unsettling habit all Dulceti had of appearing exactly where conversations became interesting. We've been monitoring human expansion for 50 standard years. A few skirmishes with pirates, some rescue operations, lots of exploration missions. Hardly the stuff of legend. Martinez nodded agreeably. That's what the records show, yes sir. Vexcallion's confusion deepened. Either the human was being deliberately obtuse, or there was something fundamentally wrong with his understanding of the situation. Then explain to me, Cadet, how someone with no apparent combat experience managed to outscore every other student in our tactical programs. Natural talent? Martinez suggested, her tone so innocent it practically glowed. Natural talent, Captain Morakves repeated, his voice dripping with dulcet skepticism. Right, because humans are known for their natural military prowess. The comment drew a small crowd, as disparaging remarks about species' capabilities tended to do in mixed company. Subcommander Thecnales, whose Kytherian brain stems were practically vibrating with interest, joined the growing circle. Actually, Thecnales said, human military doctrine is quite fascinating from a theoretical standpoint. They seem to prefer extremely small unit operations with minimal support infrastructure. Because they can't afford anything larger, Morakves pointed out. Limited resources, single world economy, recent addition to galactic civilization, basic logistics. Martinez listened to this analysis with the patience of someone watching children argue about adult topics. That's certainly one interpretation, sir. What other interpretation could there possibly be? Vexcallion demanded. You're a species that barely controls one star system, with no significant military victories on record, and somehow you're producing tactical prodigies who refuse to wear their accomplishments? The question hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. Martinez glanced around the circle of expectant faces, each representing civilizations that had been waging interstellar warfare since before humans had invented agriculture. Her smile widened slightly. Well, Commander, I suppose it depends on how you define accomplishments. I define them as measurable achievements that other people can verify and respect. Vexcallion replied with a sort of logic that served him well through decades of military service. Right. See, that's where it gets complicated. Martinez took a sip from her drink, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension. Some missions succeed specifically because nobody knows they happen. Professor Jens Culver's academic curiosity finally overwhelmed his social restraint. Are you suggesting that human military operations are conducted in secret? I'm suggesting, Martinez said carefully, that when you're really good at solving problems, sometimes the best outcome is that everyone forgets there was a problem in the first place. The statement landed like a puzzle piece that didn't fit any recognizable pattern. Vexcallion stared at her, trying to process the implications of what she just said. Around him, the other officers exchanged glances that ranged from confused to concerned. That's not how warfare works, Brixthalin said finally. Victories are recorded. Battles are documented. History remembers who won and who lost. Martinez nodded agreeably. Sure, when there are battles to remember. The circle fell silent, each officer suddenly aware that they might be having a very different conversation than they thought. In the background, the reception continued its course of polite diplomatic chatter, oblivious to the fact that one human cadet had just managed to make some of the galaxy's most experienced military minds question everything they thought they knew about warfare. Vexcallion realized he was gripping his ceremonial weapon a little too tightly. Cadet, are you telling us that human military operations are conducted without leaving evidence? I'm telling you, Commander, that sometimes the most successful mission is the one that never officially happened. Martinez finished her drink and set the glass down with deliberate precision. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a cadet with no medals. She excused herself with perfect military courtesy, leaving behind a group of highly decorated officers who suddenly felt like they'd been asking entirely the wrong questions. Dr. Yithmora's laboratory existed in a state of organized chaos that would have driven most sentient beings to madness. But then again, most sentient beings didn't possess four separate brain stems dedicated to processing different types of information simultaneously. The Kytherian sat hunched over multiple data screens. Her primary consciousness focused on human military records, while her secondary and tertiary minds cross-referenced galactic incident reports, and her quaternary brain handled the increasingly frantic communications from Vexcalion. "This is impossible," she muttered, her voice carrying a harmonic discord that indicated all four minds were disagreeing with each other. The data correlation should be straightforward. Vexcalion paced behind her, his bone spikes creating small fractures in the laboratory floor with each agitated step. 3 days had passed since the reception, and what had started as idle curiosity had evolved into something approaching obsession. "Define impossible, Doctor." "Impossible as in the mathematical probability of these coincidences approaches zero," Yithmora replied, gesturing at her screens with two arms while the other four continued inputting search parameters. "Look at this timeline. Standard year 2387. The entire Vorthan Pirate Confederation vanishes. Not defeated, not scattered, vanished. Last known location, the Kepler sector. Simultaneously, human exploration vessel Scientific Curiosity conducts routine stellar cartography in the same region." "Coincidence," Vexcalion said, though his conviction was wavering. 2389. The rogue AI collective that had been systematically consuming technology in the Outer Rim goes completely silent. No distress signals, no final transmissions, no debris fields. Just nothing. Guess what human vessel was conducting communications research 3 systems away? Vexcalion stopped pacing. The same ship, different ship, academic endeavor. Crewed by 37 humans, officially engaged in studying quantum communication methods. Yithmora's tertiary mind highlighted another data stream. 2391. The Theshan death cult that had been threatening to release weaponized nanoplagues across 12 systems? They canceled their plans and disbanded, cited philosophical differences in their final transmission. Let me guess. Human anthropological expedition to study primitive religious practices in the adjacent sector. Vessel name, cultural exchange. Yithmora leaned back, her multiple brain stems pulsing with frustrated energy. The patterns are consistent across 47 separate incidents. Every major threat to galactic stability in the past 15 years has ended abruptly during periods of human scientific activity in nearby regions. The laboratory door chimed, admitting Captain Morakves and Admiral Thoskrend. The Dulceti officer looked as skeptical as ever, but the Admiral's expression carried the weight of someone who'd been having uncomfortable realizations. "Doctor," Thoskrend said without preamble, "I need you to look up something specific. The Harakvel incident 16 months ago." Yithmora's primary mind immediately began accessing records, while her secondary mind continued cross-referencing human activities. The weapons smuggling operation that was supplying restricted technology to known terrorist organizations? That's the one. 300 vessels. Organized crime syndicate with connections across 17 systems. They had enough firepower to threaten entire planetary governments. According to official reports, they were destroyed by a rival criminal organization. Turf war gone wrong. Yithmora paused as her data search completed, though I note that no rival organization ever claimed responsibility. And the timing? Thoskrend asked quietly. The laboratory fell silent, except for the hum of processing equipment. Yithmora's expression shifted through several phases of disbelief as her minds processed the correlation. Human research vessel Peaceful Inquiry was conducting a study on interstellar trade route efficiency in the same sector, she said finally. Duration of study, exactly 3 weeks. Duration of the criminal organization's existence after that, 0 weeks. Morakves, who had been maintaining a skeptical stance throughout the conversation, finally cracked. This is ridiculous. You're suggesting that humans are somehow responsible for eliminating major galactic threats using vessels named after academic concepts. I'm not suggesting anything, Ythmora replied. I'm reporting data correlations that shouldn't exist. Admiral Thoskren moved to one of the displays, his weathered features reflecting years of combat experience across multiple theaters. Doctor, how many of these human research expeditions have ever published their findings? The question prompted a flurry of activity across Ythmora's screens. Search algorithms churned through academic databases, scientific journals, and research repositories, while her multiple minds processed the results in parallel. That's curious, she said after several minutes. The expeditions file preliminary research proposals with appropriate academic institutions. They request permits for various types of scientific investigation. They file regular position reports with Fleet Command, but actual research results. She gestured helplessly. Nothing. No published papers, no shared data, no academic presentations. Because they weren't doing research, Vexcallion said, the pieces finally clicking into place. They were doing something else entirely. But what? Morakves demanded. How do 37 humans on a single vessel eliminate threats that would require fleet actions to resolve? Admiral Thoskren was quiet for a long moment, his expression suggesting he was weighing the implications of what he was about to say. I fought alongside humans during the Kepler boundary disputes, he said finally. Joint operations, officially. 3 human advisors attached to my tactical staff. The room waited. They didn't fight like any species I'd ever encountered. They didn't engage in heroic charges or demonstrate superior firepower. They would disappear for days at a time, then return with intelligence reports that were so accurate they bordered on precognitive. Enemy supply lines would mysteriously fail. Communication networks would experience cascading errors. Command structures would suddenly develop trust issues that led to internal conflicts. Sabotage, Morakves said. Beyond sabotage, they didn't just disrupt enemy operations. They made enemy operations destroy themselves. The conflicts ended not because we won decisive battles, but because our opponents stopped being able to function as organized forces. Ythmora's quaternary mind was already pulling up files from the Kepler boundary disputes. The official records show minimal human casualties, almost suspiciously minimal. Because they were never in positions where they could take casualties, Thoskren explained. They operated like a virus. They infiltrated. They analyzed. They identified critical failure points. And then they applied pressure until entire organizations collapsed from within. The laboratory fell silent as the implications sank in. Outside, the Academy continued its daily routines, training the next generation of galactic military leaders in conventional warfare doctrine. Inside, for highly experienced officers were grappling with the possibility that one species had developed an entirely different approach to conflict resolution. So when Cadet Martinez said her missions weren't public knowledge, Vexcallion said slowly, she meant they were classified at levels we don't even have classifications for. Worse than that, Admiral Thoskren replied, I think she meant they were successful specifically because no one knows they happened. Dr. Ythmora looked up from her screens, her multiple minds reaching an uncomfortable consensus. Gentlemen, I believe we need to reconsider our understanding of human military doctrine. They're not fighting wars. They're performing surgery on galactic civilization, removing threats so cleanly that the patient never realizes they were in danger. The thought hung in the air like a diagnosis none of them wanted to hear. The Fleet Academy Secure Briefing Room had been designed to contain information that could destabilize governments, but it had never been asked to contain a revelation that might redefine the nature of interstellar warfare itself. Commander Vex Callion sat across from Lieutenant General Fextrovok, whose Zen-3 military intelligence credentials made his own combat decorations look like participation trophies. "You're telling me," Fextrovok said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled, that for the past 2 decades, humans have been conducting what amounts to extermination campaigns disguised as academic research. "I'm telling you that we've identified a consistent pattern of threat elimination that correlates perfectly with human presence," Vex Callion replied, sliding a data pad across the table. "The Virak colony ship incident 3 years ago. 15,000 fanatics planning to seed uninhabited worlds with biological weapons. They encountered engine difficulties and requested assistance from a nearest vessel, which happened to be human. The scholarly pursuit conducting atmospheric composition studies. The colony ship was towed to a repair facility, where inspection revealed that their biological weapons had been replaced with harmless bacterial cultures. The fanatics claimed ignorance, disbanded their movement, and returned to their homeworlds as productive citizens." Fextrovok's mandibles clicked in disbelief. Surgical precision behavior modification. It gets worse, or better, depending on your perspective. Vex Callion activated the room's holographic display, showing a three-dimensional map of known galactic trouble spots. Every major criminal organization, terrorist cell, or rogue military unit that has posed a significant threat to civilian populations has experienced what military historians are calling spontaneous organizational collapse, within proximity to human research activities. The map lit up with correlation markers, creating a web of incidents that painted an unmistakable picture. Fextrovok studied the display with the analytical mindset that had earned him his position in military intelligence. "The Karas slavers," he said, pointing to a cluster of markers near the galactic rim. "I remember that operation. They have been capturing entire populations from frontier worlds for 3 standard years. Then they just stopped. Human xenobiology expeditions studying reproductive cycles of deep space organisms in the region. Duration, 6 weeks. Slaver fleet status afterward. Crews discovered that their profession had lost its appeal. Ships were donated to refugee assistance programs. Captives were returned to their home worlds with substantial compensation for their troubles." Fextrovok leaned back in his chair, processing implications that went beyond military strategy into the realm of social engineering. "They're not killing these people. No, that's what makes it so unsettling. The threats don't get destroyed, they get resolved. Permanently. The Valdris arms dealers who were flooding conflict zones with unstable weapons technology, they discovered a passion for humanitarian aid work. The Nexus cult that was planning to trigger supernovas in populated systems, they had a collective spiritual awakening and founded an interspecies meditation retreat. And no one questions these dramatic personality changes. Vex Callion gestured helplessly. Why would they? From outside perspectives, these look like positive developments. Criminals becoming philanthropists, fanatics finding inner peace, tyrants developing sudden respect for democratic principles. The galaxy becomes a safer place, and everyone assumes its natural social evolution. The briefing room door chimed, admitting Dr. Ythmora with Subcommander Theknalis in tow. The Kytherian researcher looked like she hadn't slept in days, which was concerning considering her species only required rest every 72 hours. "General," she said without preamble, "we've intercepted something you need to see." The holographic display shifted, showing what appeared to be a standard fleet communication log. Theknalis manipulated the controls, highlighting specific transmission patterns. "This is routine traffic between human vessels conducting biological surveys in the Centauri expanse," he explained. "Standard scientific chatter, equipment status reports, research coordination protocols. Nothing unusual, except," Fextrovok prompted, Except that when you analyze the linguistic patterns using advanced cryptographic algorithms, a secondary communication layer emerges. Technology's activated a translation protocol, and the innocent scientific discussions transformed into something else entirely. Target analysis complete. Psychological profiles suggest vulnerability to cognitive restructuring via social pressure mechanisms. Recommend deployment of Scenario 7 with cultural adaptation parameters. Estimated timeline for a permanent behavioral modification: 3 to 5 standard days. Collateral impact on civilian populations: 0. The room fell silent except for the hum of processing equipment. Vex Drovok stared at the translated communications, his expression cycling through disbelief, admiration, and growing unease. They're not just eliminating threats, he said finally. They're rewriting the fundamental psychology of entire organizations. Without violence, Dr. Yithmora added, without coercion, without leaving any evidence that external intervention occurred, the subjects genuinely believe their transformations are the result of personal growth and moral development. How is that even possible? Because humans understand something about social dynamics that the rest of galactic civilization missed, Vex Callion said, calling up another set of data. We wage war with technology, superior firepower, strategic positioning. Humans wage war with the one weapon that every species carries but no one thinks to defend against, which is the capacity for self-deception. Every sentient being wants to believe they're fundamentally good. Humans have figured out how to make that belief irresistible. Subcommander Theknalis nodded grimly. We've been monitoring the aftermath of these interventions for patterns of relapse or resistance. There aren't any. The behavioral changes appear to be permanent because the subjects experience them as authentic, personal revelations. They're not conquering their enemies, Vex Drovok realized. They're converting them. More than that, Dr. Yithmora said, her multiple minds reaching a disturbing consensus. They're demonstrating a form of conflict resolution that makes traditional warfare obsolete. Why destroy an enemy when you can transform them into an ally who believes the transformation was their own idea? The implications stretch beyond military doctrine into the foundations of interstellar civilization. Everything they thought they knew about power, conflict, and social control was being challenged by a species that seemed to view warfare as a psychological healing process rather than a contest of destruction. General, Vex Callion said quietly, there's something else. We've been assuming these operations are conducted by military personnel. They're not. The crew manifests for human research vessels show civilians. Anthropologists, psychologists, sociologists, philosophers. The closest thing to military personnel are security consultants, and their backgrounds are in conflict resolution and diplomatic mediation. Vex Drovok's laugh carried no humor whatsoever. They're sending social workers to eliminate galactic threats. Social workers who understand warfare better than we do. Dr. Yithmora corrected. They weaponized empathy, militarized compassion, and turned therapeutic intervention into the most effective combat doctrine in recorded history. The briefing room's communication system activated, interrupting their conversation with an urgent priority message. The display showed Academy Command's emergency briefing notification, summoning all senior staff to an immediate crisis meeting. What now? Vex Drovok muttered. But Vex Callion was already reading the preliminary briefing data. The Krell Syndicate, he said, his voice tight with concern. They've acquired something called a civilization killer, a weapon system designed to trigger social collapse across entire planetary populations. Intelligence estimates they plan to test it within the next standard week. How do we stop them? Vex Callion looked up from the briefing data, his expression carrying a mixture of anticipation and dread. According to fleet deployment records, we don't. But the Human Research Vessel Philosophical Inquiry just requested permission to conduct an emergency anthropological study in the same sector. The room fell silent as they all realized they were about to witness human conflict resolution doctrine in real time. The Academy's secure communications center hummed with the controlled chaos of an active crisis. Though Cadet Martinez appeared to be treating the situation with the same casual attention she might give to a routine training exercise, she stood at the primary console, fielding transmissions from the Philosophical Inquiry. With the practiced ease of someone who had done this before, Commander Vexcalion, General Fextrovok, and the rest of their impromptu investigation team clustered around auxiliary monitors, watching what they now understood to be a masterclass in applied human warfare. The main display showed the tactical situation. The Krell Syndicate's fortress station, bristling with enough firepower to level continents, positioned to deploy their civilization-killer weapon against the agricultural worlds of the Meridian Collective. Status report from Captain Torres aboard the Philosophical Inquiry, Martinez announced, her voice carrying no more urgency than if she were reading weather data. They've established communications with Syndicate leadership and requested permission to observe their social structures for academic purposes. They asked permission? Subcommander Theknali sputtered. From terrorist planning to commit genocide? Martinez glanced at him with the patient expression of a teacher addressing a slow student. Sir, you can't study something if your subjects don't trust you. Basic anthropological methodology. The display shifted to show the transmission logs from the human vessel. What appeared to be earnest academic inquiry was flowing between the research ship and the Syndicate station. Requests to interview crew members about their motivations, discussions of the philosophical underpinnings of their revolutionary movement, genuine curiosity about their grievances against galactic civilization. Captain Torres reports that Syndicate members are eager to share their perspectives. Martinez continued, apparently, no one has ever asked them to explain their ideological framework before. They're finding the experience quite validating. General Fextrovok leaned forward, studying the tactical readouts. The weapon system is still active. They haven't been disarmed. Of course not, sir. That would be counterproductive. Martinez touched the control, bringing up psychological profiles that were being compiled in real time. According to Dr. Chen's preliminary assessment, the Syndicate leadership genuinely believes they're freedom fighters opposing an oppressive galactic order. Standard revolutionary psychology with deep-seated abandonment issues stemming from economic disenfranchisement. So you don't cure abandonment issues by validating the subject's belief that everyone wants to hurt them. Martinez's tone suggested this should be obvious. You demonstrate that someone cares enough to understand their pain. The communications console chimed with an incoming priority transmission. Martinez acknowledged it with casual efficiency, though Vexcalion noticed her posture shift slightly. The change was subtle, but it suggested a transition from observer to participant. Captain Torres for Cadet Martinez. The transmission began. We've reached the critical intervention point. Dr. Chen's team has identified the emotional triggers. The Syndicate's leadership experienced collective trauma during the Outer Rim economic collapse. Lost families, destroyed communities, systemic neglect by galactic authorities. Their weapon represents an attempt to force the galaxy to acknowledge their suffering. Martinez nodded as if this were routine briefing data. Recommendation, Captain? Standard empathetic resolution protocol. We're going to ask them what they really want. The display shifted to show the interior of the Syndicate Command Center, where Dr. Chun, a slight woman who looked like she belonged to the university lecture hall, was sitting across from the terrorist leadership as if they were having coffee together. The scene was so utterly mundane that it took several seconds for the observing officers to process what they were seeing. You're in pain, Dr. Chin was saying, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to dealing with psychological trauma. You've been in pain for a long time, and no one has acknowledged that pain. The weapon isn't really about destroying the Meridian Collective, is it? It's about making sure someone finally pays attention to what happened to your people. The syndicate leader, a Scar Volcari whose species was known for emotional volatility, stared at her with the expression of someone experiencing recognition for the first time in years. You understand. I understand that you're tired of being invisible, tired of watching the galaxy prosper, while your communities remain forgotten. The civilization killer is really a cry for help, isn't it? In the Academy's communications center, the observing officers watched in fascination as one of the galaxy's most dangerous terrorist organizations began to psychologically decompress in real time. The weapon systems remained active, but the syndicate members were increasingly focused on explaining their grievances to someone who was actually listening. This is impossible, General Fexdrovok muttered. They're treating mass murderers like therapy patients. Because that's what they are, Martinez replied matter-of-factly. Therapy patients who happen to acquire weapons of mass destruction. Dr. Chen's team specializes in collective trauma resolution. They've worked with war survivors, economic refugees, displaced populations, people who've experienced systemic abandonment and developed maladaptive coping mechanisms. Maladaptive coping mechanisms, Vexcalian repeated. Is that what humans call terrorism? We call it what it is, a symptom of unresolved psychological wounds that manifest as antisocial behavior patterns. You don't cure symptoms by suppressing them. You cure them by addressing the underlying pathology. The display showed Dr. Chen's team expanding their therapeutic intervention to include the entire syndicate crew. What had started as an academic interview was evolving into something that looked suspiciously like group counseling. The terrorists were opening up about their losses, their fears, their desperate need for the galaxy to acknowledge that they mattered. Status update. Martinez announced as new data flowed across her console. The syndicate has agreed to delay weapon deployment while they continue discussions with Dr. Chen's team. They're expressing interest in alternative methods of making their voices heard. Alternative methods? Political representation, economic development programs, cultural preservation initiatives, standard post-conflict reconstruction protocols. Martinez glanced at the tactical display, where the weapon systems were gradually powering down. Captain Torres estimates full psychological stabilization within 6 hours. Subcommander Thek Nali stared at the readings in disbelief. They're disarming themselves. They're healing themselves, Martinez corrected. We're just providing a safe space for the process to occur. The transformation was evident in real-time psychological monitoring data. Stress indicators were dropping, aggression markers were normalizing, and the collective mental state of the syndicate was shifting from desperate rage to cautious hope. Dr. Chen's team had somehow managed to reframe genocide as a mental health crisis and was treating it accordingly. Dr. Chen reports that the syndicate leadership is interested in establishing a formal dialogue with Meridian collective representatives. Martinez continued. They want to discuss economic partnership opportunities and cultural exchange programs. The civilization killer weapon will be donated to a research institute studying planetary defense systems. General Fexdrovok slumped in his chair, overwhelmed by the implications of what he was witnessing. They turned terrorists into diplomats in less than 8 hours. Actually, sir, they were always diplomats. They just didn't know how to use their words instead of weapons. Martinez began shutting down her console with the satisfied efficiency of someone completing routine paperwork. It's amazing what people are capable of when someone takes the time to understand their perspective. Commander Vexcalian found himself staring at this unremarkable human cadet who had just overseen the peaceful resolution of a galactic crisis, as if it were a training exercise. Martinez, how many of these operations have you been involved in? She paused. considering the question with the same casual attention she'd given everything else. Define involved, sir. How many times have you watched your people transform existential threats into productive members of society? Martinez smiled, the same innocent expression she'd worn during the reception that had started this entire investigation. Well, Commander, I suppose that depends on whether you're counting the ones that made it into the official records. The communications center fell silent, except for the hum of equipment and the distant sounds of academy life, continuing its normal routines. Outside, the galaxy remained blissfully unaware that it had just been saved by a group of social workers with psychology degrees. Vex Callion looked down at his ceremonial medals, each one representing a battle fought, an enemy defeated, a victory achieved through superior force and strategic thinking. Then he looked at Martinez, whose bare uniform represented something far more profound. Conflicts that never needed to happen because the problems had been solved before they became wars. You know what the really disturbing part is? He said finally. What's that, sir? I'm starting to think that all of these medals might be evidence that we've been doing everything wrong. Martinez nodded sympathetically. Don't worry, Commander. Everyone's learning curve is different. The important thing is that you're asking the right questions now. She gathered her materials and headed toward the exit, pausing at the doorway to offer one final observation. Besides, sir, success isn't really about the recognition you get. It's about making sure there's still a galaxy left to give out medals in. And with that, she left the room, leaving behind a group of highly decorated military officers who were beginning to suspect that the most important battles in galactic history were the ones no one would ever know had been fought.